Cool. Yeah. Gitlab Navigation, I think we're making a ton of changes that are helpful. I have some wild ideas of which I don't know whether it's a good idea. I don't know whether it's reasonable, but I can't help but care about it because navigation is a big lever to make things better. I have to have another look whether do I have access to projects. That might be a problem. I don't think so, but just to be sure, I'm going to open up the Gitlab projects. Let me live stream. So this is a view that most people will be working in. One thing that stands out here is that this thing says menu, which seems like a very generic thing. Like this is a menu too. These are menus. So I don't know what to find here. I can find here projects and groups and milestones and snippets and everything else. So this seems to be kind of some kind of a switcher. But then I'm getting a bit confused because here it talks about security. And here on the left, it also talks about security. So this is security and compliance, and this is security. And this is operations, but this is infrastructure. So I think there's like, I'm not sure what this menu is about as a user. I know the background of this. I know what it is, but I'm trying to kind of act as a user new to the product. And I suspect that what it's for is that it's for kind of stuff where you group, where you can kind of start a couple of projects and then look at the security of them. But you'd expect that to be kind of, you have a hierarchy here. Maybe I can just say, hey, I have some start projects, and then I have the same menu to the left that I always have, and I click on security and I see the security stuff. It seems that we kind of have two interfaces instead of one. And then if you look at the menu itself, which would require you to go, it's kind of almost this I always expect to have. And if I just say, hey, here, I want to look at like all my start projects, this menu would still show the applicable items in that. It also is, for example, monitor is like hardly used, and it's at a high level. While analytics, for example, merge request analytics, I'd almost expect that if I look at merge request, although there's no submenu here. But like, I rarely do analytics on their own. I much more think of analytics as something that should be part of something. Like CI/CD should probably be under CI/CD, and analytics for merge request should be under merge request, and for the repo should be under the repo, and the value stream maybe could be under project information. Like, I'm not sure analytics is a standalone thing. Now, I might be wrong because like the iPhone has all the settings together, which is not what I would do. And then project information talks about activity, and then labels, which feels a bit strange, but I could live with that. And then here I have issues again, which I also have here on the left, but I don't have here. And I have milestones. These are merge requests. So it feels like these are items that also could be here, but are not. So it's almost like we have three ways of looking at something. It could be in the left menu, it could be in this menu, or it could be here. And my argument is, let's put it all in the left menu. And then above, you can say, hey, I want to look at GitLab, or I want to look at all my start project, or I want to look at this or that. Thanks for letting me rant a little bit. I'll give it to Tori first, and then Christine, and then Marshall.
Yeah, so all of those kind of comments you made are not surprising to me, so that's good. That certainly doesn't seem drastic by any means. They're all valid, and they're all questions that we've talked about, so good, that's good. Well, we haven't talked about the analytics, but I think that's valid as well, about where that sits. The research that we're doing around mental models will help understand where things like analytics should go. The top bar related things and combined with projects and the sidebar, we've had some of those discussions when we've been talking with the workspaces team on how navigation is going to flesh out. So I guess my initial comments are just that I think everything that you raised is a valid thing to explore further.
Okay. And then you mentioned the workspaces team. Do you mean the workspace team?
Workspace team, yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
Did you say Austin next or first?
I just wanted to add too, I am still ramping on all this. What you just suggested makes sense to me from what I've been looking at as well. However, I'm trying to get the data also to prove kind of how necessary these left nav objects are, because I don't know, I'm just onboarding. I want to do some kind of a heat map exercise where we can see the usage more clearly. They've already been instrumented by, I think, Eric Schurter's team. But here's a link to this is our docs team, the way they're heat mapping across items. I would love to get to this level where we've got that level of like maroon, dark maroon per item on the navs and start to look at the usage from a data perspective as well.
I'd love that. And the data will set you free. I have some quick opinions without data, so please follow the data. Look, this is all heavily used, so this makes sense. Security and compliance, there's a lot of things, so that's okay. Deployments, yeah, I think we can put infrastructure under deployments. So we have deployments where we put these infrastructure items in it. Monitor, not used, but has a lot of items. I don't get why it's higher up than packages and registry. Like we have a super logical ordering for our stages, or super logical, semi-logical ordering, but it makes more sense to me, that ordering, that mental model of like going through a DevOps workflow, and it ends with monitoring. For sure, it's monitoring is above packages and registries. Then analytics, I think, should be collapsed into, and snippets could be under project information if that's going to be your kind of junk drawer anyway. And then settings, I think it's tricky. It's the Apple method. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that, but I can't argue with that. The only thing I'm puzzled about is the infrastructure registry. So this is, it says infrastructure registry. I don't know what that is, but it's all about Terraform modules. So maybe we just call it Terraform something so people understand what it is.
Is that the high level model? Left side nav follows the stages from planning to the end.
I think it makes more sense to me than what it is now. Yeah, so manage, plan, create, verify, package, secure, release, configure, monitor, protect. Now, David has an idea of how to make some tweaks to this. So you could even check in with him to do the latest and greatest. But having a package before monitor kind of maps to my mental model. Right now, I don't understand what it is based on at all. Marshall.
Yeah, I think it's always puzzled me that the menu in the menu bar does something different from the sidebar. Like I understand what it does as well. You're getting like a more aggregate view there, but I think, and I may not speak for everyone, but I always get frustrated because I know where things are and it still takes a long time to get there, even when I know exactly what I'm looking for. And like when I use GitHub, I don't even have to know what the keyboard shortcuts are because I just need to know the one thing that opens the command palette, and then you can get sort of everywhere that you need to go. And I've always really liked that in VS Code as well. I don't know any VS Code keyboard shortcuts. I just know how, like, what the commands are called, and you can type them in and get to where you're going. And I think that helps like bury a ton of complexity in just like a searchable menu, right? And it also like allows you to do really deep navigation, like into the settings, for example, without having to build a super complex menu, right? Like, I really like that you can, like on Android, for example, and I'm sure it's the same on iOS, that you can search in the global search for like a particular setting, like changing your screen brightness, and jump straight to like the 3-level deep settings option directly there. And I think that would be super valuable.
Thanks for that. And this might have already been obvious, but I'll try to articulate it in a different way. There's two things. There's the functional menu, which is these things. And then there's the scope. Right now, the scope is GitLab FOSS, but there's different scopes. For example, if I go to activity, I bet the scope is all projects. And there's another scope, which is like your projects, start projects, pending deletions, which is interesting. We need, in my view, we need one thing that is the scope and one thing that is the functions. And then like you focus, you only see the functions of that scope. And we already have a pretty good function menu here. So great, we need to reorder and probably collapse a few things because it's too long and rename a few things, but this is okay, the functions. Then we need this to be the scope. And when I press this, it should allow me to kind of make a selection, the same thing that you have here, except this is scope and this is function. So we're mixing the selector of functions and scopes, which messes with my brain for sure. And then here, we also have scope. This is also a scope selector. And then this is also this is then the global scope issues thing. So we seem to be mixing these two concepts in the interface. And I think we should have one place for both, the functions in the left menu, and then above there, either here or there, the scope. And that allows you to kind of see it from all projects or just the start ones or things like that. You don't have to agree with the idea, but is it understandable, the idea?
Is scope project then from that example?
Yeah, scope can be
functions are features.
A project, a group, a subgroup, a start project, all projects that I have access to, pending deletion, trendy projects, that's a scope. And then the function would be like issues or CI
drills
stuff
down.
Or activity.
Right. And if you were then searching in that command palette world, you'd start with where, which would be the project, and then you'd move down.
Oh, that's Marshall's
feature
thing, the command.
Yeah. Okay. But it would kind of align to that going left to right.
Marshall?
If you were typing.
I didn't quite follow the what I'm used to in like VS Code and GitHub is like there's really like no nesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sort of direct
it's a string
navigation.
Search.
Is a string search across like a bunch of different entities within the system.
I think from my perspective, that makes sense. The team's done a lot more research on these, but this idea of scope and then function. I've also been thinking about other ways, like if we can be more clear on the language. So we have project scope, features are functions, starting as a team to align on what that means. That would help me. I drafted 5 navigation buckets in this comment too, which UXR is going to be, could overwrite this or.
Can you share your screen with what you're
Yeah, I'll show. I added the link here, but I'll share my screen. It's a way to start thinking about navigation in maybe a slightly different way. The concepts. So from how I was looking at it, communication navigation, that left side nav doesn't necessarily apply to that, but it's everything I need to do to reply back to somebody in GitLab, and everyone has to do it. core view navigation would be artifacts such as a board that align a team every day to do planning poker or something like that. Those are also are not yet in our nav. However, they could come off left side nav, they could be off a dashboard on the homepage. There's lots of things we could do. And then this knowing what's in my workspace, I think is what you're talking about, Sid, which is like the workspace being the scope, and then all the features and how I easily get to them and move around within that world.
Yeah,
and so I think a lot of
the scope can also be like all projects, like everything.
Right, it could be higher, it could be additive.
Yeah.
All workspaces. Right. Yeah, and then search as nav, this is similar. I think we get into the Marshall's idea, could fit in there. And eventual like value-driven reporting, search from value-driven concepts or dashboards or things like that, which a lot of these we haven't done yet, but these are some buckets that I'm using to kind of mentally visual it until I see what UXR comes back with. And I think that defining what this is and defining some of these core view navigations that we don't have anywhere in GitLab to get, I'm getting data on that. How do people arrive at these? That will help us have that conversation and define these areas and why we have them.
I think it's an interesting idea. I don't have an opinion on it. I think it's orthogonal to what I suggested. And I think what I'm suggesting is not so much changing, but the kind of removing. Like we have three ways to do something, and some of these ways have like two concepts mixed up together in them, and that just makes it really hard to understand how it works for people. So I think that's that can be a relative. Look, these navigation changes are very hard, but it seems relatively straightforward. But in my mind, not necessarily in somebody else's. And then I think the second point I want to make is that this talk about workspaces. I think a workspace is something where at a group level, you get access to the functionality you otherwise get for a self-managed GitLab instance. That's it. Like that's what a workspace is. People keep using workspaces as a collection of groups or something else. That's not what a workspace is. And I think we've been struggling as a company for 2+ years now to get people to understand that. And it's held up kind of getting parity between self-managed GitLab and GitLab.com for 1.5 years before I personally had to, like, in my view, intervene to get there. So I'd really love for that nomenclature to just be workspace and to be very clear. We stick to the workspace definition. I think there's a lot of there's 16 different views of what workspaces means in this company, which in my view suggests that we shouldn't use the term anymore.
This might be a silly question. I haven't aligned with the team, but like, have we ever just tried some of these just to move them around?
I think there's
a small iteration.
There's been iterations on the menu, you mean?
Yeah, have we ever just, yeah, I don't know what the process has been in the past. If there's a suggestion like that, how do we validate it and then try it in the product?
Kind of some of what Sid is saying happened in a recent change, I believe, where we put everything under that menu item. But it is kind of combining two different things, to Sid's point. And this happened, I don't know when, a few months ago, I guess, maybe 6 months ago at this point. So I think we just need to take a look at those now with fresh perspective. And we can make some of these are small changes, right? Just pulling out things that don't really fit together with different purposes. So.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening to me. Just a suggestion, but thanks for letting me get it off my chest. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. I appreciate it.
I had an additional thought that I'd love to share around some of these considerations if you're open to it.
Sure.
But one of the things I think I've observed is the navigation of the product becomes heavily relied upon because of how fast it is. It's probably the thing that renders the fastest in our application. So an example of this is we might have pages that are accessible from other parts of the product, but they're in our navigation because it's the fastest way to go and find your branches. Like, could you be on the repo page and find branches from there? Like, absolutely. And because of that, it's cluttered the UI. And to compound that issue a little bit is, like we're talking about, like flattening the structure here, so it's easier to look across groups and projects. I frequently have experienced in my time performance constraints to do that, and then it quickly becomes a non-starter because we can't get over the hurdle of scaling our own infrastructure to look across those things, which is why we have such isolated compartments for groups and subgroups and projects and the admin area for the instance. It's because like our infrastructure doesn't like us to look through everything. It starts to fail, and then like, well, we can't make it look that way because then it won't be able to render everything, which is even why the merge request drop down the top right doesn't display all the data we'd like to, because it doesn't perform right.
Yeah, I think that's super valid. Thanks for bringing it up. If there's performance problems, you can't solve them in a week or a month. But I do think that it's worthwhile to have a vision of like, here's what we want to go to. And there's two things. There's features and there's scope. And they're distinct. We're going to keep them distinct. And for now, we have to do this. We have to add all this CRUD to the interface because of performance problems. And we want to get rid of it. And we're going to work on a long-term plan to fix the performance so we get there. I think that's fine. I think seeing something, a hamburger menu that is called menu and that mixes up two concepts, I don't think the reason for that is that we have a performance problem. I think the reason for that is that we haven't been clear on our vision of where the navigation of this project should go.
Yeah, both very fair points. Thanks for that perspective.
Thanks for bringing up the performance considerations, which are substantial.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, everyone.